Hey, in today's update, I wanted to talk about overpopulation and what that could mean for investors. But first, I wanted to look at a few bubbles. So we all kind of know what a bubble is. So we had a bubble in tulips in the 1600s. We had a bubble in spices as well in the 1700s. And then in the 1990s, we had a tech bubble. Probably the most recent bubble you saw was the bubble in Bitcoin. So if we look at the chart, Bitcoin kind of doesn't really do anything for a whole long time. There's like some blips along the way, like at about 2013, there's a little bit of a blip. It's probably a couple of 100%, but it's nothing compared to what happens in 2017 when Bitcoin really comes into the mainstream. Everyone jumps on, they're all wanting quick, easy returns, fast money. Emotion takes over and the price just goes exponential. And we get to a $19,000 in USD price for a single Bitcoin. Of course, when all that emotion goes out of the market, obviously prices come all the way back down. And if you look at a graph like this and you see it's a stock, you probably think that kind of exponential growth is unsustainable. But the newest bubble that people like to talk about is not an asset bubble, it's more of a people bubble. So if you look at this one here, this is the world population from 10,000 BC all the way to about 2013, 2014. So we've had absolutely exponential growth in how many people have made their way onto this earth. And I mean, just look at this graph, ask anyone and they'll say it's clearly not sustainable. And that's what the overpopulation activists tell us, that this increase is clearly not sustainable. But I wanted to tell you today why these kind of ideas, thinking that overpopulation is going to absolutely decimate the world, is actually wrong, and it's not going to happen. We're probably going to hit a peak at about 10 to 11 billion people. But if we go back to the 1960s or the late 60s, is when this overpopulation argument really started with a professor at Stanford. He wrote a book called Population Bomb. And in the book, I think what he was talking about was we had population of about 3.5 billion at the time. And he suspected that because population was going to continue growing exponentially, we would have mass famine and complete social breakdown. And a couple of the prescriptions he prescribed for us to solve our population problem was sterilized water supplies, also to tax families with more than one child. And he also proposed to let famine ravage populations that were already too big. So just let them go, that's fine, just let them, they're gone. But obviously, I hope that no one wants to do these kind of policies today, but the momentum behind overpopulation and why we need to control population has continued that momentum from the late 60s. I saw one recent figure where an activist was calling for a population of 2 billion. We need to get down to 2 billion. I'm not sure why 2 billion. I don't know how she came up with this figure, but 2 billion was her number and that's what she wanted. But again, like I said, the population is actually not growing exponentially. What we've seen in the last few years is a level off in population. And I'm going to show you how population is going to potentially be capped at 10 to 11 billion within the next century or so. And I'm going to do it with a couple of tissue boxes. Okay, so here is our very sophisticated model of the world population in tissue boxes. So we have our legend here. We've got age on this side. So 0 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 to 45, 45 to 60, 60 plus. And each of these boxes represents 1 billion people. So it's a rough estimate, but it's about what we have in the world today. So we have about 2 billion people very young from 15 to 0, another 2 billion from 15 to 30, another billion from 30 to 45, a billion here and a billion here. So basically, what is important is that you understand that what's happening with child mortality rates and fertility rates at the moment. So way back when a lot of children would die, the pride of the family was to have the most amount of children, because a lot of your children would sadly lose their lives. men would take a lot of pride in saying they have 8 or 10 or how many ever children that they had. Now, because child mortality rates are increasing, we're seeing a move towards proud in terms of how well my children are living. So once those child mortality rates come down, so less children are actually leaving this world, we see a lot of family planning happening, and that's all over the world. Once parents see that their children are surviving, they actually have less children on average. And the average is about two children per parent. So basically what we're getting is 2 children replacing their parents as they work their way up as they age. So we have 7 billion people here. So how do we get to 10 billion if we're just having 2 kids replace their parents? So the 65 and older, they're gone. They leave. These parents here, they have 2 children. And now instead of 1 billion, we get 2 billion here in the 30 to 45 category. We still have 1 billion up here. Again, child mortality rates are still low, so people are also planning their families. They only have 2 kids again. What happens is we get these people leave, and then we get these parents have 2 more kids, and they replace the younger ones. So we've got now, instead of 1 billion up here, we've got 2 billion at the 45 to 60 category. And then again, take it away, and we all move up. So this is what I think, and what a famous statistician, a Swedish statistician, Hans Rosling, would say would happen to the population as child mortality rates go down. We get family planning. Families only have 2 children. In some cases, in Japan, they only have 1. In China, they have less than 2. In Africa, they have more. In South America, they have more. But overall, it'll average out to 2 children per parent. And we get a world that looks like this, where the population is capped at about 10 billion. We might get another category up here if science gets good enough. We might get another billion up here for the over 80s plus or whatever, or over 75s. But that's basically how I would see the population growing in the next century or so. And I think this is important, not the population growth, but the demographic changes for investors going forward. What you want to try and do is, if you want international exposure, you want to try and look at countries that are relatively young. So I'll take, for example, India. India's 50% of their population is below the age of 25. The average age of the country is about 27. So you have a lot of people coming into the workforce and a lot of people going into new businesses that are going to produce more things. So you would assume that India, with such a young population, will continue growing. And that's what it's done. As you've seen in the recent news, China is falling. They have a relatively old population. I think their average age is about 37. Whereas you see India continue to grow because they have more of these young kids, more of these young adults coming into the workforce, improving output, improving productivity for these businesses. Another country you might want to look at is countries in South America. A lot of them are quite young and they're rapidly growing in terms of wealth. Countries that you might want to stay away from are potentially Japan and other countries where the population, I think in Japan it's I think in Japan it's 1 in 4 people are over the age of 65, and you don't have that many more people coming into the workforce. So what Japan has to struggle with going forward, which India and South American countries potentially don't have to, is that you have to find a lot of new businesses that can work without labor. And because we're moving towards a service economy rather than a manufacturing export-led economy, that's going to be tough for places like Japan. As you're seeing, their growth is very slow, and it will continue to be very slow unless they fix some of their structural problems. So to recap, if you're looking to go internationally, or you want international exposure and you want to dive into other countries other than Australia and the ASX, maybe you might want to look at, or maybe you might want to keep in mind this model of the world where population isn't growing that much, but demographics are certainly changing, and you want to put your money where those demographics are going to help you rather than hinder you in the future. Thanks. Remember to like and subscribe below if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more future weekly updates.